It is 9 degrees here in Philadelphia when you step outside, but
yuck!
You know where it's not all that cool? That seat that Nick Nurse fills when he's coaching the Philadelphia 76ers. That seat is hot, and we're here to talk about it on this Wednesday after the Sixers dropped a 35-point drubbing at the hands of the Denver Nuggets on Tuesday night. We're here to talk about Nick Nurse, his coaching job, what you think he's done, and where you think it should go from here. We are, of course, the PHLY Sixers Podcast, presented by Bet365.
Do we have to be, though?
We have to be.
We're going to change the name mid-show?
We have to be.
I'm more so, do we have
right
to cover this team?
Oh, okay.
There's got to be another team that we can... Can that WNBA team get here
soon enough? Soon enough.
We could pivot. We'll start covering Unrivaled, or
yes,
we'll pick a team there.
Yes,
I don't know, man.
Absolutely. Well, download the Bet365 app. Use code PHLY365 when you sign up. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Derek Bodner, Kyle Newbeck, I'm Devon Givens, Bree, producing as always. You in the chat, we thank you as always hanging out with us on a Wednesday afternoon, our final 3 p.m. show of the week. Games on Friday and Saturday, and then we get right back at it once again next week, where there are 4 games next week. So we'll have one 3 p.m. show next week to hang out with you. But with that said, again, the freezing cold outside, none of us like it, but we also don't like where the basketball team is. And while we lay a lot of the blame at the feet of the players, sometimes the coach gets a lot of it too, especially, Derek, when you are a team that was slated to be a championship contender, a team that was expected to be a one that would hit that 50-win mark as usual during the regular season. And depending on where you were, Kyle said right under it, we said right over it, but wherever we were with the win total, we all felt like this was going to be a good basketball team. And year 2 with Nick Nurse at the helm, you would think, as with the championship coach, again, that was a big reason why we thought with the team that they put together, the roster compiled, the coach would be one that, while he had some difficulties last season, it wasn't all his fault. This year, he gets some added help with Paul George, bringing in Yabusele, a nice rookie, and Jared McCain. So many pieces to add to the roster for him to be able to adjust things and have a problem of figuring out of how to get all these guys on the floor and make it work. Well, it has not worked. Some have been on the floor. Some have not been on the floor together.
News.
It has not worked. They are 15-27 after the 42 games that they have played. And we're here to talk about him today. Is the seat hot? Should it be hot in year 2?
So if we're talking like an in-season change, I don't think we're talking temperature of that level. Just because I don't think they want to make that change in season. Is it hot? I'm not going to say that the seat is hot, because that would imply, I don't want people to read into what I'm saying. In terms of should it be hot, I think you have to evaluate everything. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean, in the past, I have pretty consistently pushed back, because I think a lot of people look at coaches as this will solve everything. Let's change just one guy, and then all of our expectations will be met. And usually that is not the case. It's usually coaches get some blame because it's just the easiest lever to pull. It's the easiest thing to change. And we get reductive in the way we talk about it because of that. So I think there's certainly some of that here as well. If I was sitting here listing the reasons why this team has underperformed so drastically, number one, and I'm not going to say blame, because I don't think blame is a good word to use for injuries, but the number one reason would be that Joel Embiid has not really played basketball. Mm-hmm. Number 2 reason, and probably the person who put the most blame on because of his decisions have led to this, I think would be Daryl Morey. So I think those two deserve more of the, like I said, reason for Embiid, blame for Daryl than Nick does. Do I think Nick Nurse has made the most of what he has? No. And even more importantly, which might be what ties into this season, if there is a change of season, has he lost the locker room? Has he lost the attention? Has he lost the belief in his players? You're starting to see evidence of that. And again, I'm not going to say he has, in part because we haven't really been around the team. They've been on the road a lot lately, in part because I would want to be sure before I say something like that. But there are signs, there are symptoms that he is starting to, and that is a big indictment.
Yeah. So here's what I would say to start this off. When we say, is he on the hot seat? Should he be on the hot seat? I think one of the key distinctions to make here for me is that being on the hot seat or being able to justify canning someone does not automatically mean that person is dumb. It doesn't mean they're necessarily a bad coach. It is a reflection of the situation. And I think the best example of that is that Kenny Atkinson is currently the coach of the Eastern Conference leading Cleveland Cavaliers. He's clearly a guy who knows a ton about basketball, right? Has taken the Cavs from a pretty good team to an elite team, right? And some of that's development. Some of that's just, natural progress of their younger players and their younger guys. Darius Garland jumps back or has a comeback year after having a bad year last year. And we saw him have success with a young team in Brooklyn. But when he was coaching or was trying to coach Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and that initial version of that team there, those guys rejected him. They said, we want another guy in here, right? They picked Steve Nash was the guy they ended up landing on. Bad choice, by the way. But that did not mean Kenny Atkinson was a dummy or didn't know basketball. It meant that he was not going to have the attention of the guys in that room. And so it did not matter what his acumen is. It didn't matter what his prior resume was. It wasn't going to work. And that's an important thing to think about right now, right? Because I think there will be changes made to this roster between now and the deadline. There will certainly be changes made to this roster in the offseason. But as Derek says, if we get to a point where we can say with certainty that Nurse has lost the locker room, it does not matter if he was a victim of circumstance. It does not matter if he would, in theory, in a perfect situation, be a good coach for this team. If those guys in that room tune you out and say, I'm not listening to this guy anymore, you can't bring him back next year, and it would be end of discussion for me. I feel real sympathy for Nurse and for this coaching staff in general, right? They have had to deal with an absolute calamity of a season that no matter what the most conservative plan for Joel Embiid looked like, this is far beyond what they came into the season anticipating they were going to have to deal with. All of that being said, I think he has dealt with this season poorly. I don't think that he has had a good plan for how to manage the non-Joel games and the non-Joel minutes. I think that it looks like a team that didn't even think about developing, hey, this is what the team and the lineup and the system and the structure are going to look like without Joel. It was just like, well, we need that guy for everything to work. And that seems incoherent when you look at the messaging from the offseason and what we were told, which is Joel's not going to play back-to-backs. Joel's going to be treated cautiously throughout the season during particularly grueling stretches or as he deals with knee maintenance. So that, to me, says to the head coach, you better have plan B, C, and D ready to rock for when Joel plays. And it just doesn't seem like there was any of that forethought. I get that there are lots of injuries. I get that he hasn't had the proper rotation, but it's a combination, right? I feel for him. I don't think that I agree with Derek. He is not one of the very top reasons that they're struggling to the degree that they have. But he is also not helping, and he is certainly culpable in where they're at this season.
If there's one thing that's disappointed me, where's that creativity that we were sold?
Yes.
Like, where is the creative, specifically offensively, defensively too? I don't think they've been super creative defensively. I think they've mostly stuck to his core principles. And then you've thrown in some zone in there, which I don't think has really worked. I'd have to check the numbers, but it doesn't feel like that has been a consistent factor in these games. But offensively, like, where is the creativity? Where is this genius that spends so much time in the lab? I just don't see it. I haven't seen it all year. It's been dreadful. Really, even when Joel has been in there, the offense hasn't been good. At no point during the season has it been any kind of flow or any kind of where you had confidence in what they were looking to do. And nobody seems like they're on the same page either. It's been real, real bad.
So when I look at it, and looking at Joel has played in 13 games, Paul George has played in 28, so he has missed 14 of the 42 for the Sixers. So yes, people have been in and out of the lineup for Nick Nurse. last season. We can later on discuss how we view him dealing with these injuries and what he has done as a head coach. But for me, when I look at it, as Derek started off of, when you evaluate a head coach and a problem that is happening with the team that is playing totally different than what we expected, again, their record right now should be flip-flop. Even if we're looking at them saying they should be 16 games above 500 versus the 12, that's a fine conversation to be having because of the team that we know we're discussing of. Not the other way around where they're 12 games under 500. But when you look at that, now the blame starts to go somewhere. And you made all these big deals in the offseason. The front office, they do that. The coach, you arrive a year ago in the offseason as well, where this is year number 2 for you. So while you may not get let go during the season because the season is already spiraled, it's out of control, there's no saving. You wait until the offseason. So even though we have discussion of the hot seat, doesn't necessarily mean today or next week or 2 weeks from now. That could mean that, all right, the hot seat is there, and that could be in the offseason where they decide to make a change. But for me, when we went to training camp and we were told that Joel Embiid was going to not playing back-to-backs, and then we already know about the load management days. We know he's going to miss a certain amount of games. So the theory then was, without Paul George sustaining the knee injury that resulted in 2 bone bruises in the same knee in about a week and a half, that there were going to be an offense with Tyrese Maxey and Paul George as well. 2 max players, 2 all-stars that were going to be able to carry this team with the other collection of talent that you have assembled, having to rework the entire offense, the entire roster with some really good players that we looked at this group, that they could carry it. You get this boost from a rookie that we did not know was going to be that good. You get this boost from a player that you signed in August or early September with Gershon Yabusele that we were discussing kind of jokingly, could this guy start at the 4 spot? He has turned out to be a revelation in the front court position.
Let's not lie. We had 3 shows on Gershon Yabusele because it was August and September, and we did something to be excited about, and fans were excited. We needed content. We didn't really think he'd be starting.
Be this.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Again,
I'm agreeing with you.
You get these things that work out for you. How are you still 12 games under 500? And that does lay at the feet of the coach also. And then when you point out what Kyle just brought up about, if many people missed last night, a reporter in Denver stating that, the walls were bleeding right between the media room and the Sixers locker room because there was a lot of swearing and yelling in that room after that 35-point blowout that they suffered. That's going to lay at the feet of the coach. And if you did lose the coach, you're in trouble. Yes, they can have their own another players meeting and they can discuss, how do we do this without worrying about, yes, he's going to do his job, but how do we do this? Well, number one, of course, it starts with Joel Embiid, but you already know that you're not going to get a lot of him. And how much you get of him, you better take advantage of it when he's out there because you don't know when the flare-up is going to happen with that knee. So the coach is now, again, going to have the finger pointed at him. If Daryl Morey is not going to fire himself, he's not. If Josh Harris is focused on the Commanders and what they're doing, he's not firing Daryl Morey or Elton Brand. Yes, go Birds. Great hoodie there, Kyle. Then it's going to then go to the head coach. He's the one that's going to have to fall on the sword because of how things are going to happen. So as we've discussed this being the season from hell for this basketball team, the hot seat, the great graphic that Bree put together, it's hot, man. And it is really hot. Unless they turn it around again and have a similar month like they did in December, ending this month, going into February where you have a lower number of games because of the All-Star break. And then you have another gauntlet of a schedule in March where it's 18 games or something. And how many of those? 5 at home, 7 of those at home. You're back on the road. Yeah, we're going to be talking about this in April when the season ends because changes are going to have to be made at the end of this campaign because of how this one ends. And we're going to look at him and what he didn't do, right or wrong, of what he didn't do to get this team to turn things around and at least get them somewhere in that play-in to fight for a spot. Not even 9-10. We're talking 7-8 for this team and then get knocked out and who cares? And we're all talking
7-8. Boy, that's ambitious.
And I don't even know that's how that's going to happen. I don't know how that's going to happen, but that's where it goes for me with this head coach. And I was one. These guys have already pointed out they were not as excited about bringing Nick Nurse in.
He was the top of my list, though. I had
Yes,
questions, but he was the top of the list.
Right,
Who was
but he was
available.
at the number one for me, and I've been wrong. I stand on that one where I was wrong on that because part of it was, man, look at all the stuff he did with those guys there with Toronto. The roster, you could argue, is better here now, and he hasn't done. Where's the innovation? Where's all that stuff? And I know you have to have players on the floor to do so, but you can still run this stuff to see what it looks like. And you know how I say in football or even in preseason in basketball, don't show that. Wait till the regular season. We haven't seen anything.
Saving everything
Show
up for
me
that playoff
something.
run, baby.
What are you saving? What do you say? We haven't seen anything to say.
I have some
that is
defenses.
pretty cool.
I'll have some defenses of Nurse in the moment when we circle back.
I
mean,
appreciate
one
it.
defense is like you brought up George and Maxey should have been good enough to carry the Sixers when Embiid's out. And when those two are on the floor, they have a 120.7 offensive rating, which is 90th percentile, which really does highlight there's just not enough NBA players on this roster.
Yeah.
Like if you take,
We thought there were.
in games where Embiid's out, if you take one of those two off the floor, you're completely screwed. Like you just have no chance.
Mary Overfield said Nurse is still ramping up, which that
has become a big theme of the season,
of the
man.
franchise.
the big ramp up for everybody, not just Joel. That pertains to everybody now. So Kyle has some things that he wants to talk about in defense. And then I do have a question also on the other side about how to evaluate Nurse because of the injuries. How much should be at the feet of him because of the injuries? We'll talk about that. Kyle's thoughts as well on the other stuff of defense of Nurse in this conversation. Your thoughts in the chat. We appreciate you hanging out with us here on the PHLY Sixers podcast, and we'll get to it all on the other side, presented by Bet365. All right, and I got to tell you about Bet365. You got some basketball games on tap tonight, not for your squad, but around the association. So if you want to jump in on this Wednesday and get after it in terms of maybe, you know what, let me pick up my spirits a little bit and win some money. Let me place this great ticket that I put together and show it off to my friends and my family. Well, you got to go to Bet365 because Bet365 has over 90 million users worldwide, and you should sign up to become one of those members right now. Live streams of 780,000 events each year all across NBA, NFL, NHL, and MLB for the early payout offers. Pioneered live in-game betting right here on Bet365. And you know what? The hockey team's doing pretty well. Maybe you want to wager some things there. They have an early payout offer. The same with basketball as well. And Wednesday should be a pretty good one. Put the schedule overall if you want to jump in there. Sunday, you got some big games there for the conference championships of deciding the big game in the NFL that we hope the Birds are in, of course. And you get an early payout offer there with football as well. And last season, they did some great things in the NFL. They did some great things this season. Great stuff all across all sports, NBA, NFL, NHL, and the MLB. And right now, we do have some breaking news. Bet365, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when you bet $5. Win or lose, sign up, use the code PHLY365, deposit $10, place a bet for $5, and you get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins or loses. You can't beat that. Bonus bets can be used on spreads, totals, player props, futures, and more. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. So if you want to get a head start on MLB, start placing some of those future bets of maybe 30-plus home runs, things of that nature, batting champion, Cy Young Award winner, all right there at Bet365. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 21 plus and physically located in Pennsylvania. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Man, Devon, every time you say we've got some breaking,
it's my time to read ads. What do you shut the hell up over there? I'm talking about Golden Nugget Jewelers, buddy.
I think somebody woke Josh Harris up and reminded him he's a multi-billionaire and he can sign a 15th roster spot.
Oh my God!
Breaking news. Golden Nugget.
Okay, go on.
While the Eagles, who are much more important than Derek Bonner's words and thoughts over there, are hunting down a ring, you can too with our good friends at Golden Nugget Jewelers. They are located at Chestnut and 8th in downtown Philadelphia. Family owned and operated, unlike the 76ers, since 1987. If you're getting engaged, Golden Nugget Jewelers has a wide assortment of rings and wedding bands to fit anyone's style. you can receive a final cleaning and a written appraisal with every engagement ring purchase. And it's not just wedding jewelry, guys. They have watches, diamond necklaces, diamond bracelets, earrings, everything you could possibly need to get on the drip cam at a Sixers game. If you still believe it's worth spending your time and money to go to those, it's always worth spending your time and money at Golden Nugget Jewelers. You deserve an expert and the best price. Golden Nugget Jewelers, where Philly gets engaged. Head over to goldennuggetjewelers.com to learn more.
Welcome back to the PHLY Sixers Podcast, presented by Breaking News, Bet365. There you go. Giving you some time there. Also, somebody reminded me in the chat, because this one was fantastic. Our good buddy Martian Lynch said, the mayor can't spell Eagles. Did you guys see the video where she said ELGLES Eagles?
So, and you know what's funny? There was another person who, about a year and right when we started the company, it was right when I left the week of, we did like 2 shows. I was like, hey, I have my buddy's wedding. I think they played the Vikings on Thursday Night Football that week. And somebody was on the news and did a very similar thing, and it became a meme in my friend group. So this went into the group chat today, and my friend was like, wait, the mayor did that too? What's happening here? The simulation is breaking.
Was she nervous? She had to be nervous.
I don't know,
yeah,
man.
She had to. She knows the chant. She knows the chant. But that's going viral, and it was pretty funny. You know, if they get to the Super Bowl and win it, she has to speak at the parade, run it back, spell it wrong on purpose because it was funny. All right, Kyle, the nurse defense in a sense.
So there are a few things, right? Yeah. So Derek brought up that he would put Morey at 2 behind Joel Embiid's health in the list of problems, and can very easily connect everything to Morey for a lot of reasons. But here's something that I think needs to be noted, right? When you sign a bunch of guys who are ring chaser vets, that's good when you have a team that's performing well, right? It's a lot of guys who are desperate to try to win a championship, who are up there in age, and you're going to get everything they have. When they come in for their 10 to 15 minutes a game, it's like, hey, look at Kyle Lowry out there flying around at 38, 39 years old, whatever. Look at Eric Gordon as a super sub hitting a bunch of threes in this game. But when you are relying on as many minimum players, as many 1-year deals and 1+1 deals as they are, and there's no continuity, there's no shared responsibility for not just where the season is at, but where the franchise is at. When you come in and you're to some extent sold a bill of goods, and then you look around and it's midway through the season and you're 15-27, you are liable to quit on the season in a way that has nothing to do with the head coach, right? Mm-hmm. You're just like, I'm sick of losing. It could be Red Auerbach. It could be Phil Jackson. It could be Greg Popovich coaching this team. At a certain point, when you lose so many games and you have no real investment in this team, in this city, in this community, it's just human nature that you're going to put your head down and say the old Ricky Waters line, for who, for what, and just turn your back on the team in a way that has nothing to do with the head coach. So that's number one. Like, it'll turn into they're quitting on the coach, and we'll have lots of conversations about that if it continues. But I think that is a byproduct of not valuing continuity and long-term investment in the team by the players who are here, right? And some of the only guys who are here, like Kelly Oubre, for example, while he wasn't good last night, he's one of the guys who I think has shown the most pride, the most compete all throughout the season. He feels a little more than, the Gordons of the world, like a stakeholder in what's going on here, because he's been here a couple years. Nick Nurse did do something positive for him last year, helped him turn his career around to a certain extent, and he has rewarded him by playing hard. And like, Kelly hasn't been good enough, right? But that's because the guys at the top are not good enough. He's doing what he can. So that's number one. Number two, it's the big thing that we say all the time. There aren't enough good players, right? We can say there's no style, there's no structure, there's no system. And I firmly believe all that stuff. What system is going to take Eric Gordon, Adem Bona, Ricky Council, Justin Edwards as 4 main guys in a nightly rotation and turn that into successful NBA offense, right? Or successful NBA two-way play? It just isn't possible. You do not have the thing that we were excited about coming into the year is that they would potentially have a bunch of two-way players, right? A guy who can hit a shot, a guy who could go down on the other end and defend somebody, switch, and do all that, do everything you want on that end of the floor. Now you're basically at a point where it's like, well, you can play Eric Gordon, who might give you floor spacing, and you're going to give up a bunch of stuff on the other end because 35, 36-year-old Eric Gordon can't defend anybody and doesn't really want to defend anybody. You can play Justin Edwards and say there's an outline of a two-way player there, but mostly it's a guy who can hit some shots and is probably going to take bad fouls while he's competing, but take bad fouls on defense. Adem Bona, same thing. He plays hard. There's been positive development. But even the best version of Adem Bona is like, that's a nice energy player, but that's not somebody who's actually helping you win games. And you just keep going down the list. And it's like, how does any coach take that group and turn that into, this is a team that can go into Denver on the third game in 4 nights and put together a winning effort? You just can't. It's not reasonable. It's not realistic. I was more upset, I think, with Nurse and the team and the plan early in the season, yes, right? Where you have, when Paul George comes back, you have Maxey, you have most of the players available outside of Joel Embiid, and you're losing games that you shouldn't be losing. You're losing to teams that you have no business losing to. Teams that are now in the tanking race that we thought would be at the beginning of the season, but were bad. They have a ton of bad losses from that early part of the season. Those are the ones where I say, Nick Nurse, you coming into the year with no plan without Joel Embiid is disgraceful. Right now, I have a lot more sympathy for him and for Maxey and to a lesser extent PG. You're just drawing dead against some of these teams.
Yeah, but his failures at the start of the season are a direct cause of the apathy we're seeing now. If they pick up 5 more wins earlier in the season, you're sitting here at 20 and 22. Mm-hmm. You have a realistic pathway to weathering this storm until Embiid gets back. So I still blame, if players check out because you've got ring chasers that are on a team that clearly has no chance of chasing a ring, I blame Nick Nurse for that as well. But to your point about, engagement and ownership and sort of being a byproduct of older players on minimum contracts. And I'm not going to let Daryl off the hook for, because clearly to go to the cap space plan, you only had the one exception, which he used on Kelly, and then you had to fill out a lot with minimum salaries. But there are players like Yabusele's on a minimum. He's invested. Jared McCain doesn't have any shared experiences. Was very invested until he got hurt. Investment is as much a personality trait as it is a circumstance.
Yeah.
And Daryl pursued who he wanted to pursue. And these players are at the tail end of their career. And if they're ring chasers, they have not shown the requisite buy-in to weather this storm. And that to me does still go on. It's not like every campaign, if he was here, not that he was great, I think he would still be invested. I think he would be playing hard. So I'm not going to let Daryl
Lowry over campaign looks ridiculous.
Huge mistake. And that might be part of, Nick Nurse might share some blame in that as well, but that ties everything sort of in. So I don't and then also there's the fact that it was very evident in November that Reggie Jackson and Kyle Lowry were not going to cut.
Yes.
It's one thing to make a decision in the summer. It's another thing to do absolutely nothing through the entirety of the season up to this point to where the season is lost. So I blame Morey a lot for that as well.
Yeah. And look, I think Nurse deserves at least some credit for empowering McCain, right? I know it was so good that it was undeniable you got to play him.
Yeah.
But he very easily could have been we talked about it before the year. We're hearing the stuff at training camp. We see him in preseason, but it's a lot of he's probably going to spend a lot of time with the Blue Coats. And instead, some through happenstance, but some because Nurse said, this kid needs to play. He plays a lot. He plays well. He gets a lot of responsibility. And he's able to show some things that, frankly, we weren't sure that he was going to show ever, let alone in his rookie season. Yabusele, a lot of it is just Yabu came here with a point to prove. Yabu came from Europe, from the Olympics, where he's been out of the NBA world for a long time, and said, this is my shot and I'm going to take advantage of it. I think most of that has very little to do with Yabu, but Nurse has used him in myriad ways and tried to get him on the floor as much as he can, some notable exceptions aside, and has given him the leeway to try, to fail, to take lots of threes, to just have the confidence to succeed. And so that's a success story. Like there are examples of Nurse has allowed this guy to thrive. Nurse has helped this guy get to a place where we're talking about that success story. The problem is there are only a couple of those, and the rest of it is just like, what's the style? What's the structure? What's the transition defense thing is insane, right? Like the fact that these guys just have no real idea of what their assignment is. They're not stopping ball. They're not getting out to the wings to prevent shots. Like you watch some of those possessions, not just from last night's game, but from the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, month even, or I guess not a month because they were playing well back in December, but last 2 to 3 weeks of basketball, it's just a bunch of guys running around like headless chickens. And that's that should be easily correctable, right? Mm-hmm. That's something that you pull that up in the film room and you say, Eric Gordon, buddy, what the hell are you doing here? Paul George last night, there's a play where he just stood in the area between the 3-point line and the rim, not inside the paint, not trying to dig down and stunt on somebody, but on a transition possession, just kind of stands there hanging out. He's not preventing the shot at the rim, and he's not preventing the kick out to the 3-point shooter. He's doing absolutely nothing. And there are countless examples of bad transition possessions like that where you would think that's something that could be fixed easily. That is not. This is like basketball 101 stuff, right? The basic principles of transition defense. Stop ball, pick up a man, and communicate. That's all it is. It's mostly effort and basic communication. And the fact that they can't do it, and the fact that, and we talked about it on postgame, he was there between the first and second quarters blaming the bad transition defense on their offense. And that just wasn't true. It's just simply not true. So if that's because he isn't identifying this correctly, it's bad. If that's because he's trying to make excuses for how bad it is, it's also bad. That's the thing that I put that big time on the coaches and whatever they're doing with these guys.
And that was something, transition defense, that people would blame on Joel for years and years and years because he's posting up.
And he had, in fairness, he has not been good in transition defense.
But it's been just as bad without him, probably worse. Do you realize over the last 3 weeks, they've fallen from 12th in defense to 21st? Over like a 3-week stretch, it has been a disaster.
That's insane.
Especially when you have veterans, man, who are supposed to know these types of things, know how to fix these things, talk among themselves and fix these things, communicate with the coach and fix these things. That's a big problem.
Your veterans have mostly been bad decision makers. Like the reason you target veterans is because you can drop them into a system and they will acclimate themselves quickly. The people who got acclimated quickly on this team are the 20-year-old rookie and the guy who's been playing in the ACB for the last 5 years.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I mean, look, and even with the McCain part where he wasn't playing him early, he had to play him at some point when Tyrese Maxey got hurt. Then even when Maxey came back and the others came back, he put him right back on the bench. But eventually he did realize that the kid could play and he had to have him out there, so much so we be having the conversations of guys going nuts about, start this guy, man. What are you doing? He's coming off the bench. And those are also parts of why, as Derek pointed out, those 5 games, a lot of things happened within that time. That 5 games could, of course, change where we are right now, where you win a few of those and you're in a totally different situation than where you are right now. I have a question for the guys when we come back and keep this conversation going about Nick Nurse, and it is involving the injuries, how he's handled it, how they've handled it. We'll get into it on the other side right here on this Wednesday, PHLY Sixers Podcast, presented by Bet365.
Look, I don't know if you're like me, but I bought a lot of stuff for friends and family members over the holidays. And if that left you with a credit card balance that's weighing you down, we want to tell you about TrueMark Financial. Think about this. What if you could pay off your debt faster and with zero interest until 2026? It's true because TrueMark Financial is offering zero interest on balance transfers for 12 months, so all your payments go towards reducing your balance, not just covering interest. Transfer your existing balance from another institution to TrueMark Financial Visa credit card and take advantage of this amazing offer. But hurry up because you have to apply by February 28th, 2025. Whether you're interested in earning rewards, cash back, or simply prefer a lower rate for everyday purchases, with TrueMark Financial, you can choose a credit card that best fits your financial needs. Visit TrueMark.com/compare for full details and to apply today. TrueMark Financial, federally insured by the NCUA, equal opportunity lender. Terms and conditions apply. All loans subject to approval. 3% balance transfer fees. Standard rates apply after the promotional rate.
And I need to share with you all about how much I trust Rothman Orthopedics. Hearing about the Philadelphia football team getting ready for this big game on Sunday, and they're going through a walkthrough, closed practice. Nobody's able to get in there. We don't know what's going on with Quinyon Mitchell and Jalen Hurts. I got the remedy. That's Rothman Orthopedics. They take care of everything when it comes to these injuries with hip, knee, spine, and all. Well, right now we're worried about a shoulder and a knee with the cornerback and the quarterback. That stuff needs to be fixed for them to win this game on Sunday, and Rothman Orthopedics is the place for you since 1970. Their physicians have remained committed to research, innovation, and minimally invasive procedures to get you back to what you specialize in. That's winning football games. For those two guys, they are Rothman Orthopedics, and they specialize in you. Rothman proudly serves dozens of communities across Pennsylvania and New Jersey with 30-plus convenient offices, urgent cares, and walk-in centers as well. Year over year, Rothman, they consistently perform among the highest volume of hip, knee, shoulder, and ankle replacements in the country at over 60,000. And while we don't need a replacement, we just need these guys to be fixed and ready to go for this weekend. They can get them all right there with Rothman Orthopedics. They specialize in orthopedics and you and me with my Achilles, my ACL. They will take care of you just like they took care of me. Visit rothmanortho.com/PHLY to learn more and make an appointment today. Welcome back to the PHLY Sixers Podcast presented by Bet365. All right.
You know, Devon, when you do that ad read, I have to side with Jack. I'm a little worried about you walking in 20 years, but it might be time to hang up the basketball shoes.
He's been trying to get me to golf.
We've gone through a lot, buddy.
He's been trying to get me to golf for I don't know. 4
tennis,
5
baby.
years.
Tennis is my lifetime sport.
Let's just go golf. Stop playing basketball, man. I can't help it.
Old habits can't not.
Yeah, I can't help it. I love it. All right, Derek, starting with you. When we talk about the injuries, one of the things that I know I said at the end of last year when they were knocked out of the first round by the Knicks, not giving him a pass, of course, but man, he had a lot of injuries. Tyrese Maxey missed almost a month with that broken foot that he had. Then you also had some other injuries elsewhere. Know how long Joel Embiid was out, and on and on and on with the injuries. And somehow he made it work. He made it work. They won the 8 games in a row at the end of the season, certainly because Joel Embiid did, in fact, come back to help make that push to get in there. He absolutely helps. He has not been there. He's played 13 games. Paul George has played 28 of the possible 42. Caleb Martin has missed a lot of games. Jared McCain is out for the season, as Kyle pointed out how important he has been to this group. He has, again, had to deal with injuries. Yeah. How much do we give him for that in any discussion of hot seat or not? That is not his fault.
No, Nick Nurse isn't the reason this team isn't winning, 50 games this year. Just point blank. Maybe if he had done a better job, they could have 3, maybe 4 or 5 more wins than they have. And that would be a meaningful difference, especially if Joel Embiid is actually able to return.
We can run 5 off the top of our heads that they really should have had.
Yeah, but no coach is perfect. And anyway, regardless, I don't think he is the reason they're not 25 and whatever they would be if they had 25 wins. 42, 25 and 17. Yeah. I don't think that's
quick maths.
Trying. I have a reputation to uphold. Anyway, I don't think that's where we're at. So, would I give him, in terms of being on the hot seat, would I think he's on the hot seat because of the record? No. Because I do think this is a bad team, especially when you look at who's healthy, without enough depth, and too many mistakes have been made. Where I come in is if he is on the hot seat, it would be, if this team was losing games but playing hard, and listening, and it looked like they were getting the most out of their talent, bring them back. Like, to me, you get a shot with your full roster.
Easy call.
And what Morey and Nurse envisioned when they put together. The only reason he would actually be on the hot seat is if they have in fact tuned him out. If they are going to give this kind of effort for the rest of the year. If he's not getting through to him, that would place him on the hot seat more than the results. Because I do think the results, like I said, we can quibble over a couple wins here or there. The talent that's been on the floor is a mediocre team. And maybe they shouldn't be bad. Maybe they should be mediocre. But to me, you get another chance for that, in part because I don't think Josh Harris wants to pay a coach dead money, but in part because I think you should get a chance to coach a team that you actually envisioned when you signed up. But if it's actually tuned out, that's where the line is.
We were talking last night about watching the scoreboard of teams like Portland and Washington beating the Los Angeles Lakers while we were discussing the Philadelphia 76ers. This is the conversation that we've been having and putting them in a box with them because that's how bad their record is. Worried about protecting a top 6 pick that we didn't expect to be discussing at the end of the year. That's how bad it has been. And again, the injuries are a part of it, but that's been part of our discussion, Kyle, because of stuff like that.
Yeah, and so to add on to Derek's point, I do think the other component behind, if you get to the offseason, because I do think, barring like a complete capitulation over the next couple of weeks where, let's just say they lose out until the deadline and they're still playing a lot of these guys, that's a situation. That's like one of the rare situations where I would say maybe they do something drastic. Otherwise, I think any decision like this is probably pushed to the offseason. The other thing that I would say would be under consideration other than the team quitting is just a simple, like, does this guy fit what they need out of the head coach in terms of the offensive stuff? Because I do think if you go, a lot of people have been trying to paint Nurse as like, well, he was a one-year wonder with Kawhi, and like Kawhi carried him and built his reputation. There's like a kernel of truth in that. But I think a lot of people forget that the year after,
was great
where Kawhi was gone,
Yep.
Kawhi leaves for LA. They have the rest of the, most of the core there remaining. Right?
Turn Van Vliet and Siakam into all-stars.
That next year's team was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the bubble and it was COVID and it was weird. Like they end up, I believe they lost to Boston in round 2, right? But that was really, really, really good team where I remember this was a game the Sixers won, right? But that next year, the Sixers were up, I think like 20 points on them late in the game in Philadelphia. And they just put this like demonic full court press together and cut the lead to like 4 to 6 points with under a minute left. And they had a switch like that where they just went from 0 to 100 and had this really impressive defense where that coaching season was also a really good job from Nurse. And I do think he's being, unfairly dismissed for his overall performance in Toronto. But offensively, he's the guy that I think he's always been. He's the guy that he wants to be and how he wants his team to play, which is to say, he wants basic, he wants simple, and he wants guys to flow in and out of those basic reads, the 0.5 offense. And I'm not like, I can tell you this from reporting, but you guys have access to, there are coaches clinics that he's done in other countries throughout the US where he talks about this stuff openly and shows you, this is how I want offense to run. It's up tempo. It's share the ball, move the ball. If you don't have an open shot or you don't have a driving opportunity, move the ball and get it to somebody else. And that's kind of it, right? Like he just wants to play that free-flowing basketball. And that's great when you have a roster with personnel that are high IQ, that are good passers, that are good decision makers. The Sixers do not have that. And I don't think they have a path to getting there either unless they make some absolutely monumental and drastic trades in the offseason. So if you were to say to me, forget, like, let's say they play hard for him the rest of the year. But if you said to me in the offseason, like, look, we think Nick is a good coach. We're not sure he's the right guy to bring this group forward. I think you could make that argument because, frankly, I think this group, if they're going to stay together, might need like a drill sergeant, like someone who's just like we are going to run this specific thing on this specific play. And every time down the floor, we are going to have a level of, just this is the play, this is the second read, this is the third read, instead of trying to flow through different things. Like they might just need that. And I don't think Nurse is that guy. I don't think he wants to be that guy.
Yeah, no, his offense and his system were, if you go back to before he was hired, when was he hired? This might have been the previous podcast. It doesn't matter. That was what we were talking about. That was a concern. Certainly with the way it looked in Toronto when he had another group of, not great passers, not quick decision makers, not super high basketball IQ guys. It looked clunky. It looked bad. It was tough to watch. It was not effective. And you hope that when he got here with more shooting, which kind of looks laughable when you look at how they've been shooting this year, but here with more shooting, here with more guys who can draw double teams, it would get a little bit more creative. And it just has not. And I do think because last year they would spam that pocket pass with Embiid and Maxey, similar to how Doc does. It looked better last year. I do give him a little bit of a pass just because they've had so little time together. But the concern is absolutely still there. Like I said, it was something that I think if you watch him in Toronto, you saw he was clearly more creative, willing to try more stuff on defense than he was on offense. And this looks a lot like the Toronto offense right now.
And what if it is because he doesn't know if those current players can run the stuff that he wants to run? Maybe. And not even just to Justin Edwards or Dembona, but when Caleb Martin was still out there, all of a sudden he couldn't shoot. When you had some of the other guys, things not going well. His love for Kyle Lowry, and he can't give that up. And those types of things that are in his way that he as a coach.
The Lowry stuff is that's an example of, as we're talking about what happened to start the year, where they did have chances to win games and at least kind of hold the fort without Joel. Over relying on someone like Lowry or playing Lowry Reggie Jackson minutes or Jackson Doughton minutes now, it's like that's when you lose my sympathy, right? If you can't put together a great half-court defense with a bunch of guys who are young players and old players and whatever, okay, but when you can't put a coherent lineup on the floor, or you're saying, I'm going to play Kyle Lowry 25 to 30 minutes when he's shooting 20% from the field for a month and a half, that's on you. You can't blame anybody but yourself for continuing to use Kyle Lowry as your human safety blanket.
Especially when we were discussing the starting role of Kyle Lowry. When he was starting.
It was wild.
and that was the thing. Not just the McCain piece, because eventually McCain was out, and Kyle Lowry got some starts there after McCain left because he was the starter. And the Eric Gordon part of it, now he's starting these games. And Caleb Martin being out, he couldn't start. Paul George being out, he couldn't start. So he has to piecemeal, but it's also, again, you're trying to win these games, so you have to make sure that you don't over-rely and overtax a guy who's 36 years old. What is he, 37?
Talking about Lowry?
Yeah,
he's
38 years old. Yeah, overtaxing a guy that's
the rare move where somebody made Kyle Lowry younger.
I tried, Kyle. I tried, man. And so did Nurse. He tried to turn back the clock and starting him and think he was going to get that player. And unfortunately, that's just not who he is right now. So
it really was just wild. I felt like there was a couple of weeks where every pregame show I'd be like, do you realize over the last month and a half, Kyle's shooting 16% from the field? And
because remember when you started off and you ran off those first, 5 to 7 games, and he was at he
60% from three or something.
Yeah. No, it was 15 for 23. It was legitimately in the 60s.
He was and we know that now. We know that was all in those first few games, and that has since gone away. But like you guys said, you don't know if he has lost it. You don't know how many of those guys he has actually lost. You don't know if it's the star players. You don't know if it's the role players. But maybe we also kind of figure that out after the season, where things are there. Players are no longer here. And they start to say some things when they go to their other new teams. And even the current guys
Buddy
talk
Hield
about
took some
how
shots
much
at Nick
he
Nurse.
sure did. Yeah, he sure did.
This
right.
year.
Yeah, so those are some things that we'll find out later on. We're not going to know because the first issue with leaking of a team meeting, we're certainly not going to find out maybe what was said, at least. Doesn't matter who said it. Somebody said something that was bleeding through those walls, in Denver for that woman to report, that reporter to report what she reported about the 76ers. So this has been a lost season. And I'll ask you this, Kyle, as we wrap up the show. Players, of course, will help it for the question I'm about to ask you, but is there anything in there to make you believe that Nick Nurse can, based on what we saw from the December months, and now seeing this, 2 totally different months, 9 and 3. Right now they're what, 2-11 now, or 2-10 after we discussed it last night, 2-10. And is there anything in there that you think that Nick Nurse can duplicate what we saw in December and getting away from what we are currently seeing in January?
Get Joel Embiid back? Like I really, so that's where I say this stretch of the season, I don't see much aside from Joel being a great player, pulling this team out of where they're at right now. Right. And it's why a change now doesn't make any sense to me, because I think if you shut Joel down, the season's over anyway. You're not gaining. Frankly, you don't really want a coach to come in and like fire everybody out, right? You don't want to galvanize everyone. If you rule Joel out for the season, you're punting the season. You're saying our lottery odds are most important. So if the idea is like just switching out a coach is going to somehow change the motivation, you don't want to do that. But if Joel is back, they'll win, right? Unless there is some silent Joel Embiid, Nick Nurse feud that is not publicly known right now, that he would somehow like become healthy and more motivated if you fired Nick, then like what's the justification for right now? Because that's kind of the question we're at now. We're less concerned with, what do they do in April, May, or June, or whenever it would be. Is there justification to get him out now? And I just don't see that, because as Derek led with to open this show, with no Joel, if he's not healthy, there just is no path. They are not good enough. They are not talented enough. And should they be better than they are? Yeah, absolutely. Right. The things I pin on Nurse are the things I always pin on head coaches, which is the low-hanging fruit. Are you playing the best guys? Are you playing the guys who are in form and make sense together as a unit? I have not been happy with that stuff. But if you're asking me today, like how much of an impact can he have between now and mid-April when the regular season ends, it's a little bit. Like he can help them a little bit, and I certainly expect him to do something with the transition defense and some of the other stuff. But as far as making this team closer or close to what we expected coming into the year, nothing is changing that except for a healthy Joel Embiid. What about it with the healthy Joel Embiid part, where that is part of the problem? We know he's not on the floor, so that can change everything, but they're still waiting. They keep relying on, he's coming back. He's going to come back. And when he comes back, he's going to save the season. What if he can't? Because again, that's completely realistic. We don't know.
Chase the top 6 pick.
Yeah, you do. But what? All right. But what do you? If Paul George can play, how are you justifying that? If he can play, and the numbers that you ran off earlier between he and Maxey, and we expected it to be so much better, so much better. Then, are you that far back that even those two guys? All right. Now we know he's not coming back. This is our show from here on out. Do we know that can't be turned around? In a sense, can that, right?
Yes. I mean, if you go out and you like are able to acquire like 3 legit rotation players, then could they start winning games at a decent clip? Yeah, maybe. Not to catch like the 6th seed or anything like that, but they might be able to sneak into the play-in.
Sure.
But you don't want to, I'm not giving up resources to go chase the seed.
Fair.
And to do that, you're also swapping out some of the only guys that actually have a pulse this year, right? Like to make those trades. I'm not a big Kelly Oubre guy in the macro, right? But like you're trading Kelly Oubre if you want to make an impact trade just because of salary purposes, right? Or you're trading KJ Martin, who frankly his absence has lingered on. He was really good in December and he was helping them. So maybe you could argue, Devon, if you're trying to get into that mindset that like you get KJ healthy, right? Caleb it gets back in the rotation regularly and is not being held out as much. You get a run of games from Paul. Like, yeah, maybe you could tread water, but frankly, I'm not interested in that because nothing that you would be doing with
disagree.
A Maxey
just
and
asking.
PG and role players team, it just doesn't matter.
Because before when you had that, you knew he was coming back. So that was fine.
Right.
But now he's not coming back. That's not fine.
I
agree with you.
In
Just had to ask the
November and
question.
December and early this month when you're coming off of
when
the
you're
December
10 and 10.
and you're like, all right, you're close to 500.
Or even
it's
15
within,
and 20 before the 7-game losing streak.
That's when I'm like, hey, if you get KJ, if you get Caleb, you get these guys back in the lineup and tread water and you can hold the fort for the big fella, great. That's awesome. Once the Joel component is out, once his season, if his season were to end, you could throw out the blue coats every night. Just that's when I say you're packing it in.
That's what they've been doing, basically.
Well, no, listen, I want to see Judah Mintz out there, baby.
Yes, bring him up.
Going back real quick, you brought up like the possibility of Nurse being like a long-term fit in what you're looking for. I do think with Embiid, that guy can build a top 5 defense easily. Like I have almost the utmost confidence with Embiid, with the collection that you expect them to have in George, in KJ, in Kelly, in Caleb. That's a top 5 defense.
Yeah.
The question is the one that Kyle brought up earlier. Do you believe in him to be able to devise an offensive system, or do you feel like you need to make a change at coach over the offseason to get the most out of them? And I think that's a fair question.
It is.
It's hard to really judge because they have played so little together, but that is really, when we start shifting into off-season content, that's the question we'll be asking. I do think it's interesting. Bree threw up a poll, wasn't too long ago, but has a decent number of responses. Up to 59% say no, he was just dealt a bad hand. And I was a little surprised by that, in part because I think the people who are on like make wholesale changes, fire the coach, are very vocal. And I expected that maybe to be flipped.
Yep.
Now, if you ask the same question about Daryl, which maybe we'll get to the Morey version of this show in the weeks to come, I don't know that he's going to have as much support because I think there's a lot more like he put this thing together. He chose Paul George. He chose these guys, and that deserves its own hours worth of debate and discussion.
He's been here longer, so
he, by the way, he also hired Nurse, right? So if you do think Nurse needs to go. And there is still, that poll says 40 to 41% of people just answering that question today say yes. Well, that's certainly a factor in whether you think the president of basketball ops should be out of here.
Super chats, Davon, a.k.a. Schoolboy Beat, with both of them, and we appreciate it. What happens when you I'm sorry, Bray. Let's go to what happens when you give a first-year head coach a super team?
You haven't. Steve Nash situation.
Yeah, this is for this team, second year.
Also depends on the coach and depends on the team.
And if you're talking about this team, they haven't done enough to be called a super team.
Yeah, no.
You have to win a game before you do that.
He also says, give Nurse too much credit for McCain. Maxey doesn't get hurt. He buries him on the bench like he does all the other rookies. Well, we brought it up.
I mean, what evidence do we have that he's burying anybody this year, really?
No, but we brought it up that it took a while to get McCain on the floor, and some of it was because the injuries got him on the floor, and then he played well, and he did get on the floor.
And I will say broadly, and this was something that Kyle and I were talking about when we were talking about, the start of the Nick Nurse era while you were on your little vacation.
Thank you.
That Nurse, his track record in Toronto wasn't super play the young guys. But also that like most teams who are competing don't jump wholeheartedly into playing young guys either. I give him some credit for sticking with McCain as long as he did, for putting him in a spot where he felt comfortable and was able to contribute right away. Does he get all the credit? No, of course not. But I do give him some credit.
Jared McCain played 17 minutes in the third game of the season.
Yeah. And he was talking him up right from the jump in camp.
I think the idea that he was just going to be buried on the bench all year is a little farcical. I do think certainly Maxey getting hurt helped him ascend quicker, but I don't think it was a situation where Nurse was like, oh, he's young, I'm not going to play him.
He would have been in the rotation.
He was giving him opportunities, and I think he was able to catapult because of Maxey's injury.
Do your thing.
TV side, we say goodbye. Join us at allphly.com for the remainder, which is, of course, going to be our world-famous roll call. By the way, we did all of that. Didn't even bring up Andre Drummond's name.
He's been awful.
He has been.
Not even once.
You know, I was having a conversation with somebody this morning about actually the exact thing you brought up, Derek, which is a lot of people pinned their transition defense on Joel, who has not been good there. Andre Drummond has been as bad, if not worse, and he has not been able to leverage what's supposed to be one of his major gifts, attacking the offensive glass. So Drummond has been, maybe that's more for the Morey show, if and when we do one, but he has been a awful disaster.
So I
was just like, wow, we didn't bring up him once when we were talking about all of those guys.
I've got an article coming up, allphly.com. It's his worst offensive rebounding season of his career. It's his worst rebounding season overall since 2013-14. And this is the one that I think really stuck out. When you start talking about like the percentage of the opponent's field goals that come at the rim, right? Center is the number one person to deter that. When Embiid's on the floor, 25% of the opponent's shots come at the rim. When Drummond is on the floor, 36% of their shots come at the rim. Legitimately, you're talking about a 40% increase in the frequency of shots at the rim. And they're shooting 70.2% when Drummond is in the vicinity of a shot at the rim. 70%, Kyle. He's been awful. It's legitimately the exact same rate as Gershon Yabusele.
Same Kyle, as if I'm like Mr. Andre Drummond guy over here.
Exact same percentages, both in terms of frequency and effectiveness, as Yabusele. And Yabusele's a 6'8" power forward. Do better.
Drummond doesn't even look like he can run anymore, man.
Listen, I get that he's been hurt and he keeps coming. It's like he has 3 games off and then he plays, and it's like that's no way to play good basketball. But he wasn't good to start the year either. And maybe he was moving a little bit better.
Do you know how bad he's been, Kyle?
Blaming
him on you.
My fault. Then Andre Drummond's bad.
By the way, Davon says I was talking about Nurse being a first-year head coach. I'm guessing in Toronto.
He did a real good job taking over. He did a real good job.
Yep. Marcus Blackstock with a late super chat. We appreciate it. There aren't enough pieces to go and hunt, fellas. Enjoyed the back end of the pod today. Appreciate it, Marcus. Not enough pieces to go hunt. Well,
it'll be interesting to see exactly what the trade deadline looks like, right? Because there is, regardless of what you think of this season, there is still some urgency to try to get an ascending contributor in here because of the cap constraints that they have moving forward.
There's a huge urgency to do that. Yep.
So Derek can explain that better than I can, but they probably should be buyers for the long term, regardless of what's happening this season. And it'll create an interesting thing, right? Like, so let's say we'll throw a name out there that's come up a lot. Santi Aldama.
Yeah, I was going to say it's the head portion of the show.
I just wanted to make sure that you were locked in on the show still. So let's say they go and get Santi Aldama because he's an ascending player, restricted free agent, who you then control your destiny with him in free agency. He fits next to Joel, but he can also play some 5. Like, there are all these different things. But you trade for him, and then you're like, well, he can't help us win now, right? Like, if they ruled Joel out for the season, but you're a buyer on Aldama, it's like, how do you navigate that whole thing with him? Or it doesn't have to specifically be Aldama. It just a player in that mold or a player with that contract status where it's like, yeah, they're playing for something real, right? Like, let's say it was Kuminga instead. They give up some stuff for Kuminga from the Warriors. He wants to get paid, right? Yeah. So it's going to be hard to convince a guy like that to come here and spend the last 20 whatever games of the season just like, hey, you're on the couch, buddy. We can't have you helping them win.
No, he's got to. Unless you have an ironclad agreement between the two already, like you've got to play him.
So it's a really fascinating dynamic where they should be selling off. They more than likely should be selling off some of the vets for a young ascending player. But then that young ascending player wants to be on the floor and playing and trying to maximize their next contract. Gonna have to wait and see on that one.
I do think, and we'll have another show dedicated to this, but I think one of the most fascinating things will be Kelly. Right, because Kelly has like an $8 million player option for next season. I don't think if you look at all the players who signed contracts last year in the new CBA with the aprons and all that nonsense I won't get into now, I don't think he's getting more than $8 million in the open market next year. The question is, would he opt out to maybe try to get like $6 million over 4 years, try to get something a little longer term because he's coming up on 30, because he's had such ups and downs in his earnings? Will he opt out? If he doesn't opt out, I think a lot of people are going to be like, well, you got to sell your role players. No, you've got to keep as much salary as you can on this roster. So you have matching salary in a trade in the summer or next year at the deadline. Only reason you trade Kelly is one of two reasons, because you're not getting like a first round pick for him back. You can just cross that off the list. You either trade him because you can get someone like Aldama who you think is going to be around long term, or you trade him because you think he's going to opt out and you're going to lose that matching salary. Yeah. So again, we'll have another show dedicated entirely to that.
All right, let's get to the world famous close out of the show. Roll call on this Wednesday. And just want to let everybody know we're off on Thursday, back Friday pregame for the Sixers and the Cavs.
Speak for yourself. I got to go down to the facility and hear from these bozos on whatever's going to happen on Friday and Saturday.
Maybe they snapped their 7-game skid against the Cavs on Friday.
Just kicking things around down here.
Back at home, snap the skid against the Cavs.
Oh yeah, they're snapping the skid. Or did they reanimate Prime Wilt Chamberlain for that game, or
Prime Joel?
All right, thank you everybody for hanging out with us. They always like having a nice and rowdy chat, no matter what the subject of the show is. Thank you to Igavini, to Hedfa, to Jess with the Purple Heart, to DJ aka Mr. Sandman,
Bring Me a Dream,
to Bootzilla, to Phi Chi, to Mellow 3 Point, to Charlie Saturday, who must be a Bucks fan, because Charlie says, you are more than welcome to Marjan Beauchamp.
No thanks.
I think I am personally good on Mr. Beauchamp, but you guys can weigh in the chat, I suppose.
Seems like Rivers is too.
Thank you to X-Man, to Martian Lynch, to Sid, to Maxey 10, to Cannoli.
I got the $1 for you, Malk. No worries.
Our guy Al, the 2-minute warning. Thank you to my girl Winona.
Hey, Nona.
What's up, Nona? We got Maury's Yams. We have Logical Raptors Fanatic.
Nick Nurse fan.
We got the Raptors
chat.
People in here hanging out today. Maybe some Nick Nurse hate watching going on right now.
Saw the photo.
Philly sports enjoyer, certainly not watching this team, but thank you for watching the show.
Go Birds.
Mom's grandchildren. Hey, Ma.
Hey.
What's up? We got Kane, Kyle Wright,
what
Brian
up,
Knight, 67 Dali. Looks like.
Up 67 Dali.
Marcus Blackstock with a super chat. We had Dave on with a couple of super chats. I think that was it for our super chats.
We missed Val last night.
Val is in here.
Yeah.
Who else do we got in here as I scroll through all our wonderful people? Dan Taylor hanging out in here. Thank you to Mary Overfield was in here early and is in here always.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us each and every day on this show. If you could, for me, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon so you get notifications each and every time we go live. Hit the thumbs up button to say thank you to our awesome super producer, Bree, who's always here keeping the show together. As Devon said, we are off tomorrow, but we will be back for pregame and postgame Friday and Saturday night against the Cavs and Bulls.
Take down the Cavs.
Yet another back-to-back, and there are 2 more back-to-backs on the way after that.
Some Patrick Williams scouting on Saturday.
I like fake enthusiastic Devon. I think that's a good look.
But get ready for pre and post against the mighty Cavs on Friday night. We'll see you then. Until then, stay out of the cold, everybody.
It's cold, man.
Stay in the house. If you got a fireplace, get in front of that nice warm fire.
Cuddle up, people.
Or just turn on Netflix and get the Birchwood edition of the fireplace. Make you feel warm just looking at it. Stay warm, stay safe, take care of each other, and go Birds.
See ya.
We all silly like the mayor.